hit it.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Leslie Blevins, and I'm super excited. I'm with the Nilda Clinic, and I'm super excited to have Randi Johnson here with me today. She is an attorney licensed in the state of Washington, maybe even Idaho too, right? Yeah. Okay. Any other states?
No.
No? Okay. Well, that's pretty cool that you're licensed in those two states. And she is with Lilac City Law, and she's here to talk with us today about young family estate planning. And so this is a topic that's going to be super relevant for parents who want to plan ahead for the financial future for their children, whether you have a typically developing child, and especially if you have a child with special needs and you're foreseeing that that child will not be able to independently provide for themselves whenever they become an adult, and especially on into the future, once you're not able to provide for them, you're not going to be there in person with them. And so this is going to be a great conversation. I chatted with Randi, maybe, I don't even remember, a year ago, potentially. And we had this conversation, and it's just so far outside my wheelhouse. It's things I've never thought about before. And so, Randi, I know I said it before, but I want to make sure the audience knows that I'm going to be asking a lot of dumb questions. One, just for myself, but two, I think that this is a topic that we don't necessarily always think about, but it's so, so, so important for families to really think about, so that when and if a situation like this comes up, you feel good that your kid is taken care of. So with that, Randi, welcome. Thank you for being here. Will you just kind of give us an overview of who you are, what you do? Yeah.
Sure, thanks. So thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I'd love to talk about this topic. I'm super passionate about it. So ask all the questions. So my professional journey has been a little bit atypical in that 14 years ago, I started off doing Social Security disability benefits, which is a federal program, of course, and then added on service-connected veterans benefits through the VA. So I'm VA accredited as well. And then, while that was happening, got married, had babies, and while at a lawyer conference, it was, thrown in my face in a loving way, I might add, that I hadn't done, like, I didn't have a will, I didn't have any estate planning, I hadn't nominated any guardians for my own children who were an infant and a toddler at the time. And my husband and I were both in Florida. We had left the babies with my sister, loving arms, very responsible, but not us. And my husband basically cried all the way home, like, we gotta get this together. So I got counsel and got our estate planning done. And then through my own education around this process, I thought to myself, well, I do law for a living, and I wasn't prepared because it just, I was in my early 30s and healthy, and you just, I don't know, you don't want to think about it. It sucks, right? So you have a baby and you think to yourself, well, I can't die because there's this cute little baby who needs me. But that's not reality, right? That's sticking my head in the sand. And so I thought, well, this is a really wonderful, empowering process that I can help other parents through. And then I thought, wow, what an interesting and really important intersection between the work that we do with disabled individuals, guardianship for incapacitated adults, and the estate planning. Because at least once a month, we get a call in from a panicked sibling. Typically, the scenario is a panicked sibling calls in, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, what have you. And they've got a sibling, an adult disabled sibling, and sibling has been living with mom and dad or some kind of caretaker forever and ever and ever. They've never lived independently. Well, the parents have finally passed, and no one knows what to do with the sibling, and they're worried. They don't want, the the person's a vulnerable individual. Mom and dad might have left them money that was unprotected, may or may not have caused an overpayment, or they get kicked off of Social Security. And, the whole family's just at a loss. There's chaos, there's conflict. Sometimes that causes fighting. And I thought, if we could just spend some time educating families, because we don't know what we don't know, we could prevent all of that. We could spend a little bit of time together. 20, 30 years ago, if mom and dad had done that and already put a plan in place for that adult sibling, everyone would have known the game plan, and there would, everyone would be able to just spend the time in togetherness, grieving over mom and dad, or just taking care of that sibling without worrying about the logistics and that administrative piece, which is super overwhelming. So in the course of all that, I got really passionate about end-of-life choices and have since become a certified end-of-life doula, because I believe that everybody deserves an empowering and beautiful death. In the same way that we're working, in the birth positive movement, where there's support around mothers to help empower women to make choices, we should also not forget that people deserve to have those kinds of choices and autonomy at the end of life too.
Yeah. While you were talking, I have to just say, for people out there, that I have seen over and over and over again with families that whenever a parent eventually dies, the adult children, exactly what you're saying, Randi, that not only are the adult children left dealing with the grief of their parents, but oftentimes that is whenever the adult children start to take on ownership for all of the financials and organizing all of the little ends that need to be tied up that they've never had to deal with before. And so I think the grief compounds the arguing and bickering, but it's just a lot of stress, and it's unneeded stress, and it's avoidable stress. And so I really highly encourage families out there that if you're foreseeing that a particular one of your children is going to need to have plans being made, or that you have to have certain things set up for your child and that care is going to have to transition over to somebody else, having those plans set up so that the transition is easier for that child and easier for the next caregiver is such a gift to give to your family. It is such a gift. I think a lot of times the parents who are in the position that they're the ones that are passing on, right? So maybe the grandparents of the child that we're talking about now, theoretically. I think sometimes they think that, they're just taking care of things. They're not wanting to put any stress on anybody right now, or they think that their kids aren't going to be the kids that fight or something like that. But it is a gift to just make the decisions, to just settle everything, and to let everybody know what it is that you want, so that nobody has to guess, because one kid has a relationship with you and they think they know what you want, and another kid has a different relationship with you and they think that they know what you want, and those are two different points of view.
Yep.
So it's such a gift. So I just really want to underscore what you're saying, because I've seen it so many times in different families I've worked with. But then I also want to come back to you being a death doula, because I think that is such a, I want to say it's like a rewarding way to give back as a compliment to your career as being a lawyer. I can see how that would be very emotionally rewarding, and getting to see the full circle of supporting families.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a really neat service. I mean, like I enjoy it. No one really wants, we live in such a death phobic culture, especially now. I mean, that's incredibly highlighted now with the pandemic. And, I'm not here to glorify death. We shouldn't all just be running around. I'm not saying that either, but what I am saying is that, however you reach that end of life, when it's your time, if you don't want to be medicalized, sedated, left on a ventilator for weeks and weeks, nobody knows any of this stuff if you aren't willing to talk about it before those decisions need to be made. Because likely, once we get to decision time on that, you are no longer in a position to share your thoughts. And so your loved ones who are now in shock and stress and grieving, they're going to make a really heavily burdened decision, doing the best that they can do. But just like you're saying, Leslie, you've got 3 siblings, and each sibling has their very unique relationship with mom. And each one of them, oh, well, when we went rafting on the river, mom said she wanted to be cremated. Oh, well, when we went camping, she said she wanted to be buried. And I mean, oh, well, she wanted to,
yeah,
15 different ways. And it causes such rift, and there'll be siblings who just never talk again. And, if we could just sit down, and I know that like asking for help, where do you start? It feels incredibly overwhelming. And so we've been working really hard to create a platform that feels approachable. It feels doable. It feels like you're kind of at the intersection between a fully guided planning and not super scary.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So as you probably remember, up until COVID happened, for the last multiple years, I've been doing a lot of public speaking, like this education, right? So I would rent out places and invite parents of young children for one. I would go to nonprofits and talk to their membership and constituents, all sorts of places. I've been to the law school, and I love that stuff. I love educating. Well, you can't do that now, right? We're all socially distanced. So I had to get really creative, and I thought, well, let's leverage technology. We're using all these Zoom calls. What else can we do? So on our website, we created a fully virtual will and estate planning service. So you never have to come in here. It's fully guided, step by step. You still get me in a Zoom call. So you still have the same support, just in a kind of a distance way, because I think for a lot of people who have never had to go to an attorney's office, most people only go to an attorney if there's a problem. And I'm for the, I stand for the proposition that doing estate planning prevents a problem. It's not in itself a problem. But it doesn't always, sometimes calling someone in, hey, Leslie, come in and let's do your will. It kind of feels like you're walking down the Green Mile or going to the principal's office, but I don't want it to feel like that. I want it to feel like, hey, we're doing this thing because you care.
I have found, unfortunately the pandemic's happening, but this weird unintended consequence from it is that services across the board in so many different areas of life have become so much more accessible. And I'm wondering if people feel more comfortable pursuing this type of service, since they can do it in their home, sit there maybe even with a loved one, and just kind of feel comfortable getting started on it before they get all the way to the point of really finishing up, maybe committing to that Zoom call, those kinds of things.
Right. We've found that we've really been helping a lot of families with children or other close loved ones with special needs, where we got to do a little bit more customized planning, creating care plans, or making sure that we're choosing the right caretakers or protectors of their money, all sorts of thoughts and conversations. Because pre-pandemic, when we were all running on this rat race all the time, caretakers, parents, guardians, etc., are working these long hours. Then they're getting home and supporting and caring for their loved ones. When are they trying, like, they're not able to get here, right? And I'm not here till 8 p.m. most of the night. And, and so it feels very like, I'll just deal with the fire in front of me. But now we have a little bit more flexibility. We're not going out as much. People are working more flexible hours, and all of a sudden there's time like, oh, I can go on a Zoom call with you, Randy, at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's cool. I can do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of things I'm really interested in, kind of coming back to specifically children, young children.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked a little bit about some different facets of planning that parents might want to think about. I want us to kind of move away from the money for a moment. We might come back to that. Talking about those different levels, I guess, of caregiver, like you've mentioned the word guardian, a caregiver. I don't know if there's maybe a power of attorney, maybe that's something. What are those different things, and when would a family want to consider having that written down in place for their child?
Okay. So I always start the conversation without the money also, because frankly, as a mother of these little people here, I don't actually care where the money goes to if these people are not being cared for by the right people. So we do generally start with who are the people in your neighborhood? All Mr. Rogers like, right? But that question is really important, is who are your people? Who do you know, love, and trust that can swoop in and be with your children? If my husband and I are in a car accident on the way home from a date, somebody who has legal authority to be with my children needs to come and get them, because your 15-year-old babysitter does not. So we need to nominate emergency guardians and long-term guardians in the event that your long-term guardian, so assuming, let's say we both died or I've died, Chad's okay, but it'll be a long time before he's able to manage on his own, right? Or maybe he doesn't have capacity, maybe he doesn't ever get that capacity. So who's going to raise my children long term? Mm-hmm. Well, for a lot of us who live in these, our society now, families are across the country. We've got military families who are deployed, who are overseas, and you want to make sure that if the person that you've chosen long term is 3,500 miles away, I need someone who's within 20 minutes, because I don't want the state to assume custody over my child to fill the gap. And I want to be very clear that I'm so grateful that the state services and social services exist. We would be lost without them. Right. But if I have my druthers, if I have the choice and the opportunity to choose someone my children already know, love, and trust, absolutely I'm going to do that. So guardians, right? You mentioned powers of attorney. Those are basically incapacity documents. So an adult is going to execute that. So I have a power of attorney document executed that in the event, let's say I have a stroke, I survive the stroke, but maybe I cannot communicate, or while my brain is healing, I'm not able to make sound decisions for myself. I lack capacity temporarily or permanently. I need to make sure that I have nominated, before the incapacity happened, I've nominated a decision maker on my behalf, essentially to step into my shoes and be my attorney in fact. And a lot of people take for granted that, well, if you're legally married, wouldn't it be my spouse? Well, yeah, they're your next of kin, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've conferred all of your rights to this person, right? So you want to make sure that you've executed one so that my husband can, if we needed to sell the house, he can sign on my behalf, right? If he needed to get medical coverage or take out a life insurance, or just anything really that has a contract or is legal related or financial related, he would need that document. And furthermore, that you've put an alternate.
Okay. Because if he's in the car with you coming home from the date, then he might not be able to be your power of attorney. So I feel like we talked about, there are sometimes kids with a developmental disability. So for people out there who don't have a kid with a developmental disability, this is going to be lifelong, right? This is going to be a kid who maybe is a higher functioning kid who can do a lot of things on their own, but is never going to be quite fully independent. And so they're really going to rely on their parents. I feel like you talked to me about these might be the kids who get power of attorney. Am I mistaken about that?
Yeah. So if you've got the 22-year-old child that has some challenges, and lifelong has always heavily relied on mom and dad to help them make decisions, but understands that, like has the insight and the understanding and the level of executive functioning such that if I ask them questions, it's clear to me that they understand that by signing this document, mom can go to the pharmacy and ask what medications they're prescribed, or pick up the phone and call Dr. Blevins and find out what's happening. Assuming they understand that, I would, barring some other exceptions, would feel comfortable having them sign and say, okay, and mom can be my right now power of attorney, because sometimes there are just some things I can't manage to do. Or if the person has, let's say, a panic disorder and there are just some days they can't leave the house, but things have to get done, mom can go and do that.
Yeah, I love that. I think something that really comes up, and this, it sounds like this is on a case-by-case basis. It's not going to have a clear, like, these people need power of attorney, these people need guardians, more case by case.
Right.
But because what I'm about to say next, I think a lot of parents are going to be like, yes, this would be so helpful. But I'm thinking there's a lot of young adults out there who do have disabilities, who once they go to college, they almost immediately start to flunk out because they had such strong support living at home, and in high school had IEPs. But then immediately in college, they're expected to advocate for themselves, and they don't have that skill set. And so sometimes it's just about transitioning them, giving them a little bit more support informally. But I think a lot of those kids could benefit from power of attorney so that their parents can actually call the university.
That's a perfect example, but I actually would go one step further and recommend that all young adults leaving the nest should have a power of attorney. Whether or not they choose mom and dad, I suppose that's on a case-by-case basis too, but if you think about it, when this little person turns 18 and she decides to go to, I don't know, Montana State or something, and God forbid something happens and she's hit by a car, I'm states away. And she's an adult. I have no right to know any information. So if the authorities call or the head nurse at the hospital calls and says, hey, I have Chloe over here, that's about all she can tell me. I don't get to ask her any information. I don't get to submit any information. She could be dead. She could have a scratch, but the nurse isn't going to tell me. I'll still get the bill. Still financially responsible if she's on my insurance, but I don't get to know any information.
Wow.
And so a power of attorney is going to, I could say, hey, pull up her electronic medical file, or hey, you have a fax number, I'm POA. Okay, cool. Now we can have a conversation.
Wow. Okay. Wow, that's helpful. It's really helpful. Okay, so then once the family has figured out guardianship, power of attorney, those types of things, what else should the family be considering for this type of planning?
So the basic documents are a will. For some families, we might need to consider a trust, and that's a very big umbrella type term. Trusts can do a lot of different things depending on what mission you give it, be it a special needs trust or other reasons. There are your powers of attorney, so that's who you've nominated to make your legal and financial decisions as an adult, and also your healthcare power of attorney. So that doesn't necessarily have to be the same person.
You said the healthcare decision?
Healthcare, right? So who's going to help me make my medical decision?
Okay.
Then there's your living will / advanced healthcare directive. So what are the choices around life-sustaining measures a ventilator, hydration and nutrition, all of those things. Do you want them? Do you not want them? Do you only want them if you're pregnant? Doesn't matter to you. These are conversations that we really need to have and get ahead of it, because don't you want someone, we can't just rely on someone, well, my brother knows my wishes. That's not enough, right? And then if you end up with the other brother or another adult child and they disagree, they're fighting and fighting and fighting. And next thing you know, you may ultimately end up on life support measures for 3 months while they're fighting it out, and that's never what you wanted. It's always going to be easier to just confront the conversation and put it all down.
Sure.
And then, of course, a HIPAA authorization for all the obvious reasons. So after you get through like the tools, right, these documents, I think it's equally important for people to understand like your values, your ethics, your guidance. Nobody knows these children. Nobody knows your dependent as well as you. If part of the fear around doing these documents is that no one knows how to do it, well, let's put down some guidance and instructions on the care of your child. Let's talk about it. So I take my parents and families through a recorded interview, and I ask them things like, you know, tell me about Johnny. What does he love? What are some conversations you had with him when you thought about when he's a grown man? Or what is some advice you would want to give? What are your religious choices around raising him? You know, I think that's really important. The flip side to that is if there's people in your community, your family tree, or, you know, friends of family, and you have concerns about any one of them interacting or being around that child, that's also important that your nominated guardians need to know. If you have concerns that grandma has an addiction problem and could potentially try to manipulate the child out of money, or would physically harm or emotionally harm the child, guardians want to know that too.
That's so important. I never thought about that part of it. But I could easily see that, you know, as adults, I know this is the case for me, that like all of my family lives on the exact opposite corner of the United States. And so it's something where we don't have the day-to-day interaction. And so if you think about maybe sometimes adult siblings, if you were going to assign your adult sibling to be your guardian, I could see if you don't have day-to-day interaction that you just wouldn't know those types of insights. And if your child is an adult who's a dependent, and they're going to live with your adult sibling, then making that transition as easy as possible for your child and for your sibling, I think, is so important, because it's already hard enough, the grief process for both of them.
Right.
Yeah. Could you, I don't know if you can or not, but could you give some examples of a couple of things that people have put in there, as far as maybe just thinking about children with disabilities, like things that people put in there where they're like, it's so important that whoever takes over for me understands this about my kid?
Sure. So one of the things is, so parents will say, you know, our son has been with us his whole life, and now he's, you know, 25, let's say. And it's very important to us that he have as much autonomy and independence as possible. So what we hope to happen is, you know, if we're still around when this happens, we're planning in the next handful of years, we're going to buy a duplex, and Johnny gets to live in a, you know, house A, and we're in house B, but it's his own space. He can come and go as he likes, but we're there to check in. We're there to pay the bills. We're there to, you know, have companionship. And our hope would be that if we die or something happens to us, that so long as it's feasible, Johnny gets to stay in the duplex, and they can rent out the other side for income if that's helpful. They can pay, we left money in a trust for him, that there could be a housekeeper, that there could be someone almost like a personal assistant or a caretaker to help making sure that he's eating well, he's not just eating Cheetos and, you know, all of these things, but he still gets to have his own adult life and freedom there. Right. So that's conversation that if you left that out, who the heck would know that? Nobody would know that that was your long-term plan. And for the most part, people that you nominate as your alternate guardian, assuming they had guardianship over that child, or they were just working in tandem as a power of attorney, nobody would know. And likely what ends up happening, the statistics would show, is that most adults with special needs end up, because they're vulnerable, typically end up on the street, they've lost housing, things get very complicated. I mean, you know, documents on documents, everything's DocuSign, everything is 6 and 8 steps instruction, and that's complex, that's hard to do. And all these passwords for things, and stand in line here and wait on the phone with this agency. That's so far outside somebody's wheelhouse who's never handled that before. They end up on the street, somebody preys upon their trusting nature, swindles them out of all their money, and now where did they go?
Right. You know, I'm just sitting here thinking, like you saying that, I'm thinking people watching this might think that's hyperbole, but it's not. It's not hyperbole at all. Not at all. And I think even a best case scenario would be that an adult child who really needs to have a plan put in place for them, if they don't, the best case scenario is they end up in a group home.
Yes, that is a best case scenario when there's no plan.
Yeah, and group homes, from my personal experience, I would not want my child living in them. Not that they're all bad, but if I had a choice, and this expert chat today is about having choice, right? This is about taking the opportunity to have choice, then I would want to be able to make a plan for my child so they could do something different.
Right. Or at the very least, if the decision before you is, it would be best if we chose a group home, you should choose one. Like, let's already have created that conversation with the home you'd like for them to be in. Let's have the child visit. Let's have them check in. Let's not make it like this complete traumatic, drop them off at the front door situation.
That is such a good point, because there are really good group homes out there. And if you've already vetted them and you know exactly the one that would be best for your child, and your child is up for that, then that actually would be excellent.
Right.
Companionship, help with self-care and daily living skills, all of it. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Wow, this is so helpful. I love it. So something that you, well, real quick before I go into this question, I'm wondering from the side of the designated guardian, what is their role in this planning process?
So it depends. I mean, nomenclature, be darned, but if we're talking about a court-appointed guardian for an adult incapacitated individual, their job necessarily means that they have an active, right now, duty to care for and protect their person, right? And so that could be serving as a representative payee for their Social Security benefits, helping them obtain safe housing, setting up resources. That doesn't necessarily mean that the guardian needs to like be the personal assistant and doing all these errands. It just means that like you're frankly legally responsible to make sure that this person is cared for and protected. Okay. If we're talking about guardians of a minor child because mom and dad have passed, or there's no parents, or whatever, if it's unless and until that situation has happened, it's just a dormant title, right? So my husband and I are both alive. We have nominated guardians and 3 sets of alternate guardians. We went 4 levels deep because I like the people on the list. So I could at any given time have traveled with them, or, we've all get sick at the same time, or,
I guess
So,
during the pandemic, that's important, right?
yeah, absolutely. So, my sister is our first in line if something happens to Chad and I. Well, there's nothing for her to do now. She knows she's got her paperwork in a safe, and there's nothing to do unless there's something to do.
Right, right. And I'm assuming you want to tell that appointed guardian.
It's ideal. Legitimately, you don't actually have to. I think it's helpful that the person knows, because somebody should know where your stuff is. Right. But you don't, quite honestly, you don't have to, but I think it's good to know. I don't think you necessarily need to tell, hey, you were number 4 on my list. I don't think you need to say that.
I just want to let Josh and Becca know that Blue and Squirrel, you're up for guardianship of them. They'll know what that means, and they'll be mad about it, but it's okay. Those are my cats, the ones that were yowling just a minute ago, if you heard them. Okay, so now let's move to this next piece, which I think is really important for our parents out there that have kids with developmental disabilities. I remember you mentioning to me that there's kind of this timeline. Like, we know that some of these kids are definitely going to need either a power of attorney or a guardianship. And you had told me age 17. I was like, well, when do we act? And you had said age 17. Can you take me back through that? Remind me of the process that a parent needs to go through whenever their kid is still a minor, in order to make sure that there's no gaps in being able to provide care for them.
So assuming your child has capacity to contract and add mom as a power of attorney, doing it on their 18th birthday is just fine. Because there wouldn't be a gap, because we're already stating there's a presumption. The premise is that Johnny has capacity to sign off, right? So we're not saying he's incapable of making some decisions. But for other children that we know, the difference between 17 and the next morning they wake up at 18, and they're just not there. Maybe they'll never be there, but they're not there on the 18th birthday. And we know that we're making all the decision making, because if left to them, they don't understand, or they're going to sign contracts and not know what they're doing, right? We see that all the time, because once they turn 18, you can sign up for 1 million credit cards, and they don't know what they're signing. So I say start at 17, let's call it 17 and a half, sure. And you could file for guardianship with this idea that 2 months later, in a typically developed guardianship case, you have a hearing about 60 days later, COVID notwithstanding, and a judge agrees and the doctor agrees and everyone agrees and signs off, and now mom gets to be guardian. There won't now be a gap on the 18th birthday, because you've already gotten the court to acknowledge that nothing will change. The child's IQ is 60 and he's always going to need help.
Okay. What if the child, so I think that's really clear. So just to summarize, if the child very clearly has capacity to make decisions, but just has a few key deficits in their life, and the child agrees the parent should help them make decisions, they can sign a power of attorney.
At 18.
But yeah, at 18.
Right.
But if the child very clearly has limited capacity and will need guardianship, everybody agrees on that, start working about 17 and a half to go through the guardianship process, so there's no kind of gap in your ability to care for your child once they turn 18. What about those kids in the middle, where that kid is saying, I'm an adult, I can do everything. They have really no insight into their limited capacity, but everybody's kind of like, no, you really don't have the capacity. Or maybe it's not even that everybody says that. Maybe it's like people who intimately know the child say that, but superficially, the people who superficially see the child wouldn't necessarily say
Right.
that.
Right. So that becomes, of course, complicated, and I would, for better or for worse, assume that the people who intimately know that child know that it's complicated because they've probably always been dealing with a child that lacks insight into their abilities, right? You could still bring, mom can still bring an action and file for guardianship. Now it may end up being contested by the child, and the child's going to have access and has a right to representation. They'll have an attorney, and then ultimately a judge will decide. But it doesn't have to prevent or preclude a loved one from filing the guardianship, because your perception of reality is different than theirs.
Right. Okay. So that's another good reason to start at 17 and a half.
Yeah, and having those conversations with the pediatrician or with their mental health providers or whoever is on the team, and just, they're turning 16, turning 17. Let's start talking about it now, because the more information you can put into their medical chart notes leading up to when that guardianship may need to be filed, the better off everyone is.
Right. Right. Okay.
Which also kind of plays into the idea of if when child turns 18, we need to file for Social Security for SSI benefits. It's real, generally, I'm going to make a generalization, but generally speaking, it's tough for young adults to get approved for SSI benefits. Why? Because what we find is, particularly for children and young adults with neurodevelopmental disabilities, they have their IEP. They may or may not have a 504. They may or may not have, a therapist or a psychologist or what have you on the team. But everyone, the PT, the OT, everybody wants to write how great Johnny's doing in these last couple of years. He's meeting his goals. He's doing this and that. And next thing you know, you've got Social Security Administration going, well, he met all his goals. Why should I approve him? Of course he should go out and do something. And you're all sitting, and then I'm talking to mom and dad, and I'm like, Mom and Dad, all the doctors and providers and therapists said he was doing just fine. And they're like, what are you talking about? He doesn't know how to tie his shoe.
This is why you should always go to a psychologist.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, for evaluation purposes. That's what I mean. For evaluation purposes, because I think that I think in the grand scheme of things, we have a lot of training in that realm, and we can speak to and talk about adaptive functioning. Yeah,
it becomes a real big problem. And then, it takes time before we can get the medical records to support the reality of the situation, that he's doing as well as he's doing because he's living in a bubble.
Yeah.
Let's describe the bubble. And if we can't just send him downtown and get on a bus and go work at Goodwill. That's never going to happen for him. We love it. It's not right now.
Right. And that's interesting. Social Security, you've had an experience where Social Security would deny them SSI income if they could get on a bus and make it to Goodwill for a job?
Sure.
Because I don't perceive that as being a sufficient amount of income from that job to really be able to support yourself.
So the threshold for what they call substantial gainful activity is rather low. It's only $1,260 gross per month. So if you break that down into $13.50 an hour, it's not full-time work, and $1,260 a month after taxes is typically $900 or something. That is not a lot to work with.
Right.
Better than nothing, of course, but it can make things rather complicated.
Yeah. Interesting. So what areas have I not asked about that you're still dying to tell me about?
I think we've covered most of it. The only thing I would add, sorry, I have a tickle in my throat, is that a lot of, not a lot, the 30% of parents who do actually write a will or do estate planning, they do it once and they never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And estate planning is something that needs to be updated. I think it's important to look at it at least every 24 months, especially when we have children, because the people we've nominated for guardians, they might move away. Maybe you hate their guts. Maybe they died. I mean, you don't know, right? So initially, when we wrote that first plan and my kids were super tiny, we nominated my mom as our first primary guardian. She's a nurse. She worked in the NICU for 20 years. I'm like, okay, babies are her jam. Here you go. Take these babies. Well, she's older. They're older. In the meantime, my sister graduated from grad school. She got married. She moved out here. She bought a house. I'm like, oh. And mom's like, I think I just want to be a grandma if something were to happen to you. I don't know that I want to be a parent all over again.
Right.
That's right, of course, So it was time to update the plan. We had nominated an individual to serve as successor trustee to handle any monies for our children. Well, she divorced out of the family. And, maybe for some people that would be fine. For our particular situation, we decided, I think it'd be best if we kept it in the family. But all that to say, it's just important to sit down with it and say, where are we now? Do our choices still reflect the values and needs of our family? So,
that did actually remind me of another question, just a basic question. Can you, and I'm sorry, my cat keeps meowing. Can you hear her? You can't? Okay, that's great. For some reason, she wants to go out the front door. She's never been allowed to go out the front door, but she wants to today. So would you define for me what a trust is? We didn't really talk about the money part at all.
Yeah, I like to use analogies just because I could go on the technical bender, but I mean, I don't really want to know from a mechanic how the brakes work. I just want to know that it stops my car. So that's kind of how I roll. I think of it as like, those radio flyer wagons, like a little red wagon, right? So the trust is my wagon. It's a legal document that describes I created a wagon and it's going to hold all of my assets. And depending on what kind of trust it is, it may not exist until after I've died. Sometimes they exist right away, and only for a very limited purpose. But at any rate, my trust is my wagon. And if I've created the trust, the handle belongs to me. Everything in this wagon belongs to me. And I'm just pulling it around while I'm alive. Well, if I become incapacitated, I don't need a court to decide who should be my decision maker. Why? Because when I created this wagon, I already decided who would be the wagon puller if I couldn't do it. Or if I've died, I've already decided who my successor trustee, who's going to manage my wagon and everything in it. What are you putting in it? You're putting the assets in it. Depending, again, on the needs of, like, what the mission of the trust, why you created it. If it's a special needs trust, maybe we bought that duplex and my deed says it belongs to this wagon, as opposed to we don't want to put it in the name of the adult disabled child. Why? Because it could kick them off of Medicaid. It could disqualify them for means-based services. And so I don't want to put anything in their personal possession, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it can't belong to Johnny.
That's interesting. I wonder too if it's also safer for any assets to belong to a trust because a developmentally delayed or well, I feel like it's more developmentally delayed than just disabled in general, but some of those individuals might be more prone to being taken advantage of by others.
Right, 100%. So if you do your successor trustee, so let's say you've got mom and dad who've always been taking care of things, and then upon our death or we get too old and it's, it's just too much work, we could not, there are professional trustees. Some of them work at the bigger banking institutions, but there's also private bonded licensed individuals, people who by trade are attorneys, accountants, people who have professional degrees and like understand the documentation and whatnot. You can hire them and you pay them, a monthly fee to make sure that everything in here is protected because they have a fiduciary duty to protect the beneficiary of the trust or to protect the stuff in the wagon for the benefit of the beneficiary.
Right. So in that way, let's say that you have a kid that's super impulsive. They also wouldn't be able to go and spend all the money in the trust.
Yep, correct. And that doesn't necessarily even have to be like a special needs trust. You can create a trust. So let's say I come to learn that my 5-year-old has some impulsivity problems. She, in every other area of life, she's fully functional, no deficits, she's got a job. I just know that, like, if you give her 10 cents, she's going to spend 11, and I don't really need her to have all of it. I can put all of this stuff in a trust and be very particular about how frequently she can have a slice of pie.
And that's a really nice way to keep her secure and for the rest of her life, potentially.
Right.
Yeah, that's so nice. I'm glad we came back to that money part. I don't know that. Cool. All right, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
You can make a pet trust for your kitties.
You should have said that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. My brother already says that I'm a cat lady and nobody will ever marry me. But I think I might now that you say I can. I love it. I love it so much. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Here, Randi. All of this information is super helpful. I know I have actually been sharing this with several of the parents that I work with, and it is information that I think doesn't just inherently come to mind until a parent has their kid turning 18 and they're going to college and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, suddenly I can't do anything for my kid anymore. Mm-hmm. I've never had the experience of, the parents passing away and suddenly having the kid in there, of course. But it is something that I think is a gift that parents can give to their children. And so I really appreciate you taking us through all the details of it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, everybody. This has been Randi Johnson with Lilac City Law. And Randi, where can people find you if they'd like to learn more?
Sure. So our website is lilaccitylaw.com. And in there on the homepage, you'll see the information on the virtual wills. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and, all the places. We try to put out a lot of information that's educational like this. I have a whole series of like 1 to 2 minute kind of video, frequently asked questions. So I know we talked about like, what's a trust and what does a guardian do? And so we have that in like smaller little snippets, and that's all shareable if you wanted to share that.
Yeah, I'll definitely put some links wherever you're watching this video. Just go to the description and you'll find some links for a lot of Randi's educational information. Awesome. Okay, guys, so remember you can go find more learning videos about child development, education, child psychology over at anildaclinic.com. Please sign up for the learning emails. I send out 1 a week, and my goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by September. So sign up and share it with a friend or a teacher or a provider, anybody who would be interested in this stuff. All right. Bye, everyone.